Chapter 1. A Brief Interruption. The tile in the bathroom was cold. I barely felt it because my hands were shaking so bad. The barrel of the gun clenched between my teeth, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't letting one more motherfucker step out of my life. I was walking out. Me. This time, I say when. I hear her pounding on the door. I hear her screaming, but it's like she was a mile away. It's faint. It's distant. Fuck it. People say that things happen for a reason. That day in the bathroom, I didn't want to live anymore. I didn't want to lose one more person, deal with one more disappointment. At the time, it wasn't about my sadness or pain. I wasn't even thinking about that. This was cold-blooded vengeance. I was going to make everyone that ever hurt me pay. When they thought about the bathroom wall covered in blood and brain matter, it was going to be their fault, and they would have to live with that. I grew up in the Bay Area. My mom was a saint before I was born. She was a spiritual woman with a good heart. At least that's what I was told. It wasn't until she met my dad that things changed. They were happy at first. My mother was in love with him. She thought that he was in love with her too. When I was born, my dad didn't show up to the hospital. My mom waited for him. 7 days I lived in this life without a name. She didn't want to name me without him. To me, it feels like I started this life as a nobody. When my dad showed up with another woman to the hospital and told my mom that he didn't want to be with her anymore, it broke her. That crushing blow started the next few decades of my mom being addicted to crack. She was introduced to it at a party in 1984, 6 months after I was born, as a means of making her feel better. And it went on from there. I bounced around a lot between families. So much so, between kindergarten and 12th grade, I went to 14 schools. A lot of things happened in that time. We'll go into some of those later on in this book. But when I was young, I knew what my mom's addiction was doing to her. I can remember telling her that I wanted to grow up and be a cop so that I can arrest her and all her friends. She told me that when I was 5 years old, I waited for her on the bed in her little studio apartment while she was in the bathroom getting high. She said when she came out, I asked her to come sit next to me, and then I said, "Ma, why are you doing this to yourself? You should just go up to the roof and jump off and kill yourself. At least it will be faster than the slow way you're killing yourself with this stuff." Hell, I guess you could say I started my coaching career at the age 5. At 8 years old, my dad showed up at my grandmother's house and said that he was taking me to live with him. I didn't really know him. I could not figure out for the life of me why my grandma was letting me go with him. I was also thinking, where is my mama? No one was giving me answers, so I just came to the conclusion right there that they didn't love me and didn't want me anymore. I lived with my dad until the 10th grade. We didn't get along. I'm not going to discount the lessons I learned from him, but most of the time his delivery methods were shitty. I know now there were a few crucial moments where if he didn't do what he did, I wouldn't be here to write this book. I'd be in jail or dead. He taught me to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, hold doors for women, respect elders, and all the other Southern values and manners. I remember one time I was playing a video game in the living room and my little stepbrother got up and cut it off. I was so pissed. He was about 3 at the time, and I picked him up and threw him across the living room onto the couch. My dad looked over at me and said, "What the fuck? Oh, you hard? You want to be a thug? You want to beat up little kids? Okay, I got something for your little ass. Come with me." I did not want to go with him. I just knew he was going to beat my ass for sure, but he didn't. We left out the house and started walking towards the liquor store on the corner where the local neighborhood drug dealers would hang out. My dad walked me right up to them, turned around, looked at me, and said, "Since you like to get angry and act all hard, here's where you belong." Then he said to them, he wants to be hard like y'all so he can stay here. And then he left. Here I am, barely a teenager, no jacket. It's like 11 p.m. at night, and I'm just hanging out on the corner with a bunch of people I don't know. One of the guys walked up to me and said, "What the hell are you doing out here?" I told him my dad made me come out because I got mad and pushed my little brother. It turns out my dad actually knew this guy, but I didn't find out until much later. Chip was his name. He talked to me about staying in school and how I didn't want to be a part of that life. At the time, I was so mad, cold, and confused, all I heard was blah, blah, blah. I don't know how long I was out there before my dad rolled up in the car. I got inside the car and we drove to the cemetery. When we got out of the car, my dad walked me into the middle of the headstones and told me, "If you continue to get so angry or act out, you're going to end up either in jail or here." And then he left me in the cemetery. I swear to God, he left me all damn night, but it was probably only about 10 minutes or so. About a week later, there was a drive-by shooting at the corner store my dad left me at that night, and Chip was killed. That shook me. See what I mean? Even though I really did not like him growing up for a lot of different reasons, he taught me some really valuable lessons. A minor shift. In 8th grade, my dad and I moved to Georgia. I got so tired of being picked on and made fun of for my non-name brand and hand-me-down clothes, I joined the junior ROTC program freshman year of high school. I had always liked their uniforms, and I knew that at least on Tuesdays, when we were told to wear our uniforms, I wouldn't look like a bum. After joining, however, I started to feel a sense of belonging. It was a perfect environment for me. I loved the teamwork and leadership I was learning. I loved the drill team and competitions. To be honest, there wasn't a single thing I didn't like about it. One day, when I was in the 10th grade, I came home from school and asked my dad if I can go to the junior ROTC training camp for a couple of weeks with the class, and he said no. When I asked him why, he said, "You didn't do the dishes or take out the trash, so you ain't going." Man, I was pissed off. So I responded with, "I'm not going to grow up to be a lazy bum like you." And that pissed him off. We got into a huge physical altercation. Sometime after that, during the summer break from school, one of my cousins came to Georgia to visit. I was so angry with my dad at the time, I told my cousin that if he left to go back to California, he needed to take me too. I told him, "If you don't take me with you, I'm going to kill my dad in his sleep. I will cut his throat. He has to sleep sometime. I can't take it here with him anymore." The next thing I know, I'm getting on the bus back to my grandma's house. I graduated high school in 2002 and went straight into the Air Force. I was in my tech school training when I found out my grandma had passed away, and that's when my downward mental spiral began. I was given the option to go be with my family, and I took it. Unfortunately, I had to leave the day before her funeral because of the number of days I was gone, and my options were to either go to her funeral or restart my 15-week training all over again. So I went back to training. Her death rocked me. I took it really hard. She was the one stable thing in my life, and it felt like she just left me. At the time, I wasn't thinking about her, the fact that she was in heaven or anything like that. I was just pissed that she had the audacity to leave me behind. She abandoned me, just like my mama did. At least that's how I felt. I was pissed and started to unravel. Shortly after my grandma's passing, my buddy from high school told me he had a homegirl who was at the same training base as me and that he would introduce me to her. I met her at the base pool hall later on that week, and we hit it off. As the weeks went by, we started dating. As more weeks passed, I began to fall in love. I was so broken by my grandma dying that in my crazy ass mind, I just knew that my grandma led me to her and she would take care of me and love me. It wasn't long before I laid the weight of my entire world, my self-esteem, my self-worth, and my trust squarely on her shoulders. When she told me she loved me, that was it. That was all I needed to hear. I asked her to marry me just 2 months after we started dating. We got married at the courthouse right after our 18th birthday and then moved to Virginia. We had no idea what we were doing and had no business getting married. I was so insecure and immature in our relationship. I was verbally, physically, and emotionally abusive to her, and I didn't trust her. I thought she was cheating on me with every guy she talked to. She didn't deal with it for long, and when she finally got the courage and said she wanted to leave, I lost it. That's when I ran into the bathroom with the loaded gun, locked the door, shoved it in my mouth, and with her begging me to stop, I pulled the trigger. After that colossal failed attempt at suicide, we got divorced. I can't blame her. I was so broken then. I had no idea I was so mentally ill at the time. I blamed it on a million things and a bunch of people. But it's like I always say, you don't know you're living in shit until you smell fresh air. A major shift. After my divorce, I started drinking really heavily. It was the only way I knew how to cope with the loneliness and heartache. I ended up taking a leave for 2 weeks from base and went home to the Bay Area to get away and party with some of my friends. When I got back to Virginia, my electricity was cut off. I spent all of my money in California, so I didn't have any money to pay my electric bill. I called my buddy, who I worked with on base, who we would call Andrew, to borrow some money to pay my bill. He told me to just come stay with him until we got paid and I could cut the lights back on at home. He said, "Oh, by the way, I'm having a party." I was 19 and down to party, so I went over there to stay until my power got cut on. When I got there, I was slamming back drinks. I had beer after beer without really having any conversation. After doing that for a while, I was done for the night, so I asked Andrew where to sleep. He said the extra room was upstairs and to the right. When I opened the door, there were 2 people in the bed. I told them to get out of the bed, and as soon as I saw it open, I flopped on the bed and went almost instantly to sleep. Sometime later, I woke up to a female touching me. Before long, we were having sex. The whole time, not one single word was exchanged between us. Afterward, we went back to sleep. When we woke up that morning, we got up, and I walked her to the door where she told me her first name but didn't want to exchange phone numbers, and that was it. We could say that I met her that morning at the door because the night before, I hadn't really even seen her face. I didn't think twice about it, but what happened afterwards would change my life forever. A couple of days later, back on base, I was called to the security forces office to talk to 2 local police officers. One of the police officers asked me, "Did you go to a party last weekend?" I answered yes. He said, "Did you meet a female there?" I said yes. He said, "Did you 2 have sex?" I said yes. All the while I was wondering why they were asking me this. Then one of them said, "The girl from that night is accusing you of rape, and she's a minor." My head started spinning. I was so confused. I know what happened that night. What was she even talking about? I told the 2 officers exactly what happened, and I told them I didn't know she was a minor. The officer said all I needed to do was write down my statement, and then it's all good. I put all of my trust in those officers, just like anyone else would. I knew I didn't do anything, and on top of that, I wanted to be a cop when I got out of the military. It was my dream job. I wouldn't ever jeopardize that on purpose. They said they needed me to come with them to the station as a formality. I was 19. I had never been in trouble, never had experienced any of this. I thought everything would get worked out, so there was no problem with it. I got in the unmarked patrol car with them, and we had casual conversation all the way to the station. They were being so nice. One of the officers was asking me where I was from, why I moved to Virginia, and we talked about the Air Force, just regular conversation. When we got to the station, they continued to act like it was all just a misunderstanding. I was taken to a little room where they told me that I had a right to an attorney. I told them that I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't need no fucking lawyer. The feeling in the room changed when I realized that they were taking advantage of the fact that I had no clue of what was happening. Then they told me that I was being charged with rape. When I wrote my side of what happened, I didn't have a clue that I was signing a confession that would be used against me later. I was so confused about the situation. I was confused about court, and I was confused about everything. I had no clue what I was doing, how to defend myself, and no one to turn to for help. I ended up spending 3 weeks in county jail because I refused my bail hearing. I didn't know what a bail hearing was. Hell, I thought I was going to trial. No one was telling me anything. I had 3 weeks before I had another bail hearing. I didn't meet the court-appointed lawyer until the day of my arraignment. And I got a total of 5 minutes with him before going in front of the judge. He sat down, and I swear, this Colonel Sanders looking motherfucker with a bow tie looks at me, and the first thing he says is, "Son, your goose is cooked." I was like, what the fuck? What does that mean? He told me that I needed to plead guilty and I'd be facing 2 years in prison and have to register as a sex offender for the rest of my life. Are you kidding? Hell no. I didn't do this. When we stepped up to the judge and he asked me how I plead, I said, not guilty, and he's fired. I need time to find a lawyer on my own. Thankfully, the judge granted me some time. I had heard from a friend about this particular lawyer and contacted him. He told me that it would be $5,000 to retain him and at least $2,500 to show up at my arraignment. I didn't have a dime since the military had stopped my pay while I was in county lockup. So I didn't know how to come up with it. I called my dad. I told him what was going on, and he said, let me see what I can do. Didn't hear from him after that. Luckily, the day before my court date, the military had put my back pay into my account. It was $2,500, exactly what I needed to pay the lawyer. The next day, I went to court to plead my case. The girl admitted she lied about it, and the charges were dropped. I was so happy walking out of there. So glad it was finally over. The next day, I got a call from my lawyer saying that the prosecutors were filing new charges. Carnal knowledge, which means that I unknowingly had sex with a minor. How's that a law? I don't know, but it is. My question was, what was she doing there in the first place? Where was her parents while she was out all night? And why is the guy that invited her, Andrew, and allowed her to drink and do drugs not being charged? Why was I the only one in trouble? I was pissed. My lawyer told me that he agreed that it was bullshit charges. He also told me that as a former prosecutor for the county, I had no chance of beating it in trial. He said we could fight it, but my jury of peers would most likely be older white conservatives. Considering I was a young black male and she was white, they would, quote, throw my black ass under the bus, end quote. Then he said, you want to go to jail or do you want to go home? I said, I want to go home. At that point, he suggested that we ask for a withhold finding, which would mean that I would plead guilty considering the circumstances. If I stayed out of trouble for 10 years, my record would be expunged. My lawyer said he didn't see any reason that it wouldn't go through because I hadn't been in any trouble before. We walked in, I pled the case, asked for a withhold finding, and the old white man sitting on the bench looks at me and says, no, I'm going to make an example out of him. He then looked at me and said, I'm sentencing you to 5 years in prison, suspended on 10 years of probation. My heart just sank. I mean, I had a dozen character witnesses from different levels of the Air Force and other departments that were there to support me. They knew me. They knew I would never do something like this on purpose and testified to that fact. My lawyer and I couldn't figure out why the judge did that. Even the bailiff, as he was taking me to be processed afterwards, whispered to me, I'm sorry, young brother. That was fucked up. He should have granted you that. As I was leaving the courtroom, a dark-skinned, middle-aged man, retired from the Air Force, walked up to me, extended his hand, and said, Hi, I'm Hank. You don't know me, but we have a mutual friend. He suggested we meet. Let me give you a ride home. I didn't know it right away, but that ride home would change my life forever. During the ride home, Hank looked over at me and said, Young man, your life doesn't have to go the way you think it's going. It can be totally different if you're willing to think different. I thought, how the hell am I supposed to do that? It was after that conversation he would introduce me to what later on would become what C.T. Fletcher calls my magnificent obsession: personal development.